I'm Thomas, and you're listening to the Gracing Podcast, where this week we are going to talk about the gravel bubble. And I didn't talk about this on my own, but I invited Madeleine, better known as Maddy Nutt, on the show to talk about this. So we at some point had a phone conversation for different reasons, and we started chatting about whether or not we are approaching a kind of bubble state. Has gravel grown too quickly, become too big? And do we therefore fear that, the bubble may burst anytime soon? And then we decided, hey, let's record a podcast and talk about this because it is an interesting topic. And so we did. Let's also note it's not like a definitive analysis or like data-backed reporting on the state of affairs in the global gravel racing circuit. But I think it was rather interesting that we both had like the same feeling, getting the same vibe from the scene, that there is maybe something to the extent of a bubble happening, and we explored it in the conversation, which I hope you will enjoy. But before we get there, I want to cover a few topics. If you've been listening along here, you probably also follow me on the other channels, and maybe it occurred to you that I was rather quiet over the last 7+ days, and that is for a good reason. I went down a deep rabbit hole. Actually, one of the rabbit holes that, let me put it like this. Maybe you know these projects where at the beginning you think, this could be a cool idea, let's get rolling. And then while you do it, you realize how big of a fucking project that actually was. And if you would have known, you probably wouldn't have started in the first place. But I had started it and I finished it. I'm talking about power rankings. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept. If you are, like me, a big sports fan and probably a bit into US sports in general, then certainly you've come across power rankings before. And I wanted to do some for the gravel pros, the men and the women who race gravel. And I assembled them. And I'm not giving away the rankings on here today because they will drop in the next few days over on escapecollective.com. So watch out for them. You will see me posting about it on Instagram, Blue Sky, Twitter, and everywhere, wherever you can follow me. Of course, I will also mention them in the newsletter. So wherever you follow me, you will come across these power rankings. It was just, and this is what I want to tell you today, it was a whole lot of work because if you engage in such a project like ranking gravel racers, and in particular doing it on a global level in a fragmented sport like gravel is, then you need to first find out how to do it. What's the methodology? You need to collect data. You need to figure out your framework. And so all this I did. And in the end, I even played designer and assembled some kind of cards of the top 25 women and top 25 men on my list. Really curious to hear what you will say once this drops about the result. I assume not everybody is going to like every position, but I honestly, and this I can promise you, I didn't take things lightly. I sweat over many of the decisions. I had conversations in the background with people like from Paul Force, Soli Spirit, and others about individual riders. And, well, it was a whole lot of work. It's going to drop soon. Watch out for these. And then in other news, reports came out, or first an Instagram post by Santa Cruz came out that the hit squad, the Santa Cruz hit squad, will be no more. That's probably not surprising if you follow along. Here we talked about Keegan Swenson moving to Specialized allegedly. Before you heard these rumors, Of course, we didn't know and could only assume what would happen to the hit squad. And now we know the team is going to end. Santa Cruz is folding it. At which point, let's be real and look back for a moment, because indeed it's the end of an era. They launched the team in 2021, which is long before most brands not only were active in gravel, but I don't think anyone considered teams in gravel at this point in time. And they took it seriously, of course, driven by the fact that there was a Keegan Swenson who you could already see is very, very good in the sport. Even though, look, at this time, he hadn't won Lifetime Grand Prix. Yet the Lifetime Grand Prix wasn't even a thing the way it is nowadays. So they really invested early in the sport and built it. And I think they did it in a way, look at the name, the title, it was cool. It was really fitting. Gravel was true to the game, if you want to put it like this. And they even at today, you hear the talk about domestiques. Will domestiques come to gravel? Well, in fact, at the hit squad, they already had Tobin Ortenblad, who raced on behalf of Keegan in the biggest races, at least. Of course, he's accomplished himself, was even like single speed, cyclocross or single speed, some discipline world champion. Apologies to not having this 100% on top of my head. But in the big races, he was there for Keegan, making big pulls, giving him spare parts from pretty early on. And so they really were innovators in gravel racing. And therefore it's sad to see them go, because they built something that was initially really unique, and even until the end had a really good brand within gravel. But well, life moves on, and so Santa Cruz has no hit squad anymore. Let's take a moment and look where the riders that were on the team are going to be. Keegan, we don't know yet officially. We heard all the specialized rumors, so let's see what will come out in a couple of weeks from now. Tobin, we now learned where he's going to race and what has happened. He will stay at Santa Cruz, keep on racing like his own program, but as he explained, will also combine it with a bit more of desk work for the brand. So essentially, he's starting a transition from pro to also working a proper job. I'm almost a bit sad that he doesn't join Specialized as like a domestique there as well, but he's not. So I assume that nobody else will come on the team in such a role, because I could not imagine that Keegan would pick anyone else to be his domestique and not bring Tobin. I could be wrong, I don't know, just speculating here. But that's my take. There will most likely not be domestiques if I would have to bet money on it right now. Then let's look on the women's side. There is, of course, Alexis Garda. And there we don't know. I didn't hear anything yet. She didn't post anything on Instagram yet. I just hope that she is taken care of and has all her contracts and all her stuff lined up for the next season, either as a privateer or maybe on one of the newly emerging or already established other teams. If she's not, well, then you should get her. I told you I'm not going to give away my power ranking results here in full, but she is in these power rankings in 12th spot on the women's side. And at worst, like if you disagree with the particularities of everything that you will read soon, she's at worst a top 15 gravel racer in the world. So if she's still on the market and you're still looking for a gravel pro to race for your team, for your brand, well, go get Alexis, because she's really, really good. And then lastly, Ruth Holcomb. I'm also not aware of her setup for next season, but something that is at least, I think, positive for her. And mind you, she won the U23 Lifetime Grand Prix in rather dominant fashion. She received the She Sense Foundation's Strava Strive for More grant, which makes me believe that she has things sorted out for her Lifetime Grand Prix campaign in 2026. But yeah, these are the updates, the riders, the end of the hit squad. And last but not least, the All Gravel Awards results are in. The fan vote has closed, and I know who won each and every award by now. But I'm not going to tell you. It's not because I'm mean, well, maybe I'm a bit mean-spirited today, but no, it's just because we are going to announce the awards one by one in the upcoming weeks. And the best way to make sure that you are not going to miss them is either follow the Outside or the Gravel Stack Instagram account, because we are going to make all the announcements there. And then also there will be stuff about it in the newsletter and in other places. But yeah, we want that all the winners have a chance to get a bit of the spotlight, quote unquote spotlight, obviously. But yeah, we will announce them one by one, starting at the end of the year and moving into the early 2026. So watch out for who gets these awards. And now I'm joined by Maddy Nutt. Hey, thanks for taking the time to come on.
Thanks for having me.
So the story of this podcast is essentially, we don't know each other super well, but we had a call for different reasons the other day and started talking about the current situation in gravel, professional gravel at large. And then one term came up in our conversation, and it was like the bubble, the gravel bubble. Is there a gravel bubble? And I figured that is an interesting question, because I've been thinking along those lines and hearing stories from different people along those lines for a bit. And we decided in that moment, hey, let's do an episode and talk a bit about what's going on in the sport currently, because these are very interesting times, and not necessarily only for the best reasons. Do you remember how we ended up getting on this subject when we talked off the record?
I think it was because the Gravel Earth series had just announced their calendar and Lifetime had just announced their athletes. And I think it was off the back of being like, there's so many events going on, and like people are having to start choosing what they're going to do. Is there too many events? Is there like, are the people very confused about like the races that they're producing, who they're producing them for, what's happening with like the professionalism of the sport in terms of like, say, for example, with Gravel Earth series doing one of their races a week after Unbound, things like that. I think it was off the back of that that kind of ignited this kind of conversation about, do we think that this is sustainable, or is something going to happen?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And like in prep for our conversation here, I tried to create a little bit of a structure for myself mentally to say what are the dimensions of the gravel bubble, so to speak, that we need to address. And I think one, there is the market environment at large, like gravel sales of gravel bikes, what's happening in the bike industry. Then there is the situation on the rider side, and there I mean specifically the pro rider side that we are concerned with, not normies like myself. And then the race organizer promoter situation that I think is interesting, and you already alluded to that. Anything else that you think is also part of the equation that we need to talk through today?
I think also like the mass participation, like because at the end of the day, the reason that events happen is because of like gravel normies taking part. So I actually think that they are probably the most important part of the equation when it comes to like the sustainability of the sport, whether that's the sustainability of the professional side of the sport. I think they're kind of two separate questions, but that's something that maybe we can talk about. But yeah, I think that at the end of the day, the people buying, like entering the Unbound lottery, like however many times in a row trying to get a spot, the people who are funding the gravel industry, and their race participation matters in terms of, the future of the sport.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that is something I took note of it, and falls to me in like the promoter situation broadly. But yeah, we definitely need maybe to make a distinction between what's happening on the pro side there and then on the mass participation side. Which of these angles tickles your fancy the most? Where should we start?
I think maybe let's start with the most topical, which is like event series, event races, like there being so many races on the UCI calendar next year, like more money in a lifetime, just like how kind of saturated the race calendar is next year and complicated it is.
Funny that you mention this and start with the UCI series. By the time people will listen to our episode here, they will also be able, or already might have listened to the episode we just did, like a roundtable sit down with Erwin Vervecken, Rosa Klöser, Paul Voss, and myself, and talked about what's happening in the UCI series, what happened last season. I mean, there were many topics from how it went on the women's side and the problems it had there, the media presentation, and so on. So that was a good one. And of course, one thing that also came up there is the number of events. The 45 plus more in the pipeline is what he said. He hopes to get a sign up more than 10. He also said he thinks it needs to get smaller, but as a global series, it also kind of wants to have representation around the globe, not only in Europe. As a professional rider yourself and somebody who is well connected in the scene, talking to many riders, what is the whispers on the ground that you are currently hearing about this, and what are your thoughts on the calendar next year and the development at large?
I think there are mixed feelings. I think some people are excited about there being so many events and like in some exciting new places. And I definitely echo that. Like when I looked at the calendar, I saw some like really exciting locations for races that are places that I'd love to go and race. And the fact that there's a UCI race there is a perfect excuse for like a trip to somewhere new and exciting and exploring a different corner of the world. And I think, as you said, it is important to kind of make it, for it to be a global series and for it to be a place where people all over the world can access gravel racing, especially if people want to, and we're talking about amateurs here as well as professionals, they want to qualify for world championships. It's obviously a big expense if you're in a South American country to travel over to Europe to do a qualifying round. So if there are more rounds in South America, it makes it a lot more accessible. At the same time, I say mixed feelings because the prestigiousness of the UCI series kind of, I would say, is slightly affected by the fact that there are so many events, because it's, especially when there are conflicting events on the same weekend and conflicting with other big races. So say, for example, there's one in Sardinia the same weekend as the Tracker, which is one of the biggest global gravel races. It's hard to like keep the UCI races with such a view of prestigiousness if like all the top races are at another race that weekend. And if people can't afford necessarily to go to some of the races because they're in such difficult locations to access. So I think that having so many races does have its pros and cons, most definitely. And like as a racer, hard to pick which races to do, which is kind of cool that there are so many races and you have to really pick which ones you want to do. And it's exciting for me to like look at the series and go, okay, well, I know that for me, a race in Belgium isn't going to suit the style of racer I am. I much prefer like much rougher, hillier, more technical gravel courses. So I would prefer to go back to Brazil, which is one that I've done that was like a little bit mountain biking in parts, super hilly, like some 30% climbs in there where people were having to push their bikes. And I much prefer to do that than like one in Belgium. But it's at the same time, it's if I go to Brazil and like I won the race in Brazil last year or this year, like if I go to Brazil again next year and I win, will that have the same impact as if I won a UCI race in Belgium, for example? So it's it's a tough topic. And I think it's hard to kind of please everyone. And I think the UCI is doing that the best that they can in terms of like including more events, but it definitely is hard as a racer to know how much to prioritize the series. And especially when there are so many series going on, it's hard you can't do everything. And for me personally, I think the UCI series is going to be a focus of mine next year. And that's mainly because the World Championships in Australia will be the most gravel race of all the UCI World Championships we've had to date. And I'd quite like to have a sufficient amount of points to have a good start for that race. And I also think it being in Australia will lead to a different start list than previous editions. When it's been in Belgium and Holland, of course, all the Dutch road riders show up. And I don't think they're going to necessarily fly over to Australia for World Champs there. So I think it'll be a really interesting race. And for me, that's why I'm going to really look at the series this next year. But I think there's so much going on. And like, for example, the UCI race clashing with the tracker, I can't do that race if I'm going to do the tracker. So it's a really tricky one.
It's almost a blessing in disguise for the American riders or the few European ones who decided to do it and got accepted, that they have the lifetime Grand Prix over there, because it simplifies this entire topic massively. Because, if this series is your priority, which I assume it is at least until the halfway point or so, for everybody who is in there, you know what your most important events are. And then you can pick a few highlight races around here and there. And for Europeans, I feel like this year it was like the people who were really in gravel, in the scene, so to speak, they kind of went for gravel earth mostly and did a couple of UCI races mostly to ensure a good starting position at the World Championships. And now this year it changed a bit with the developments in the gravel earth series and now the bigger UCI calendar. And so certainly it makes it tougher for the pros. And maybe it's a good moment to take a few steps back. Like in gravel racing and the history of it, so much has happened in less than 5 years. I would say in the last 3 to 5 years, there was so much growth, and everybody entered, like the UCI entered the space, I think in 2022 for the first time. And like it started with 11 races. Now we are at 45. Then, okay, the calendar of Gravel Earth series shrunk because they kicked out a lot of the races, but many of these independent races they partnered with still exist. Only a small number is now has moved to the UCI calendar. And we had an explosion in races and events everywhere. There was a time when it felt like every new race is sold out. Like they announced a race and a few weeks later it sold out. There was, of course, like the COVID boom and the effects of the post-COVID boom when people bought their bikes, started to get into it. And there were, like, especially in Europe, there weren't that many races. So it was easy to sell it out. But also in the US, my understanding from talking to people is this happened. And now from conversations I have with promoters, it has become much more difficult to sell out. And it's probably only the top rated races, which is maybe less than a handful, I don't know if you have more insights on the promoter front. I didn't check if I could still buy like a Trucker 200 or 360 entry right now, which would be on paper the race you expect to be sold out the quickest in Europe.
So yeah, I think so. Tracker now, I think you can't buy 200, but you could buy a 360 or a 560 ticket is what I think. I don't think you can buy anything shorter anymore. That's still sold out, which yeah, as you alluded to there, you'd expect that to have sold out. I think we are reaching a point where there maybe are, I don't want to say too many events, because I think if an event can exist and people can do it, that's amazing. And I don't think that we should limit the events. But I think at the same time, for events to have a sustainable future, they obviously need the entries to fund them. So yeah, we definitely need to reach a point where the like supply and demand are like close to being similar. So like the amount of people wanting to do these races is the amount of entries available. I think Unbound still is crazy how I just think it's insane that you pay nearly $400 for an entry and you still enter a lottery to do that race. And like having done that race twice and it being my least favorite race I've done ever, I think it's pretty insane that they've built that kind of image that people are so desperate and keen to do that race. But I guess it just has a lot of history behind it. And regardless of it not being the most exciting course, it not being in the most exciting part of the world, it definitely has a certain buzz around it and brands love it and people care about the result there as well. I think that's another thing, that there's a few races like Unbound and the Tracker, and I would say UCI races to a certain degree, where like brands really do value performances at certain events. So it is, I would say it's actually really hard as an athlete at the moment when selecting your calendar to think what's actually most important to my sponsors, like which of these, because there's so much going on. And like, as you said, you could focus on Lifetime, you could focus on Gravel Earth, you could focus on UCI, you could do other, there's other races that are like well known and not part of any of those. So say, for example, the Rift in Iceland. And yeah, like what's most value to the sponsors? And for me, I've kind of come to the conclusion that like at the end of the day, I make content where I tell stories of the races that I'm doing, and therefore like where I can get a good story and have a great time and enjoy the race experience, that's going to be my priority. And if a sponsor needs me to be at a certain event, say for example Unbound, regardless of it maybe not being my favorite event, then I'll go. But yeah, it's actually becoming really challenging to decide where to put your effort, especially when it comes to your training and trying to peak at certain races as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Let's maybe start with the aspect of the number of races. Like you say, it's a simple economic reality. There is supply, there is demand, and there are no made for pros only races right now. I don't know if they will come, but because they are not a thing, the lifeblood of most events out there is the entry fee revenue stream, which also then, if you have enough entries, you will be able to sell more sponsorship, which for most of the races out there is based about the number of people on site. Because the majority of the races doesn't have like the media game that liberates or would liberate the event from having to sell as many entries as possible, because like once you have a live stream and you have a great media production, then sponsors will also hop on to be part of this and the exposure that you're getting, and the pros will select it for this. But the majority isn't in that state, probably doesn't want to be there, because the organizers maybe are not minded like this. So then how many races do normal amateurs, normies do? 5,
That's
maybe?
a really good question, because they're expensive and
Yeah,
the travel is
exactly.
expensive, and they're way more expensive than like other events, because often you really do have to fly somewhere for a gravel race.
Yeah, and there is no more COVID. So during COVID, it was easy because everybody had all that time. And these days are over. Now people are back in their offices, back at the jobs. We have other responsibilities. So I would say probably 5 races on average for the average normie. Maybe less, maybe more for those who even enter races. Because I think something that is a distinction between the European and the US scene is in the US everything is a race, but effectively for most people, it's an event. And in Europe, we have much more events that are not races, where there is no time taken. But I know many of my cycling friends don't do races, but they participate in these events, which are more social in nature, and they have all the vibes. And then the UCI races in particular, but I think it's also true to the limited amount of Gravel Earth Series races I've been to. They also are quite performance driven from the crowd that is there and so on. So I think we have this distinction, which is all more crammed into one and the same events over in the US, where at Unbound you will have like the videos about like all buddies on bikes, for instance. They race Unbound, even though of course they don't compete for top positions maybe, but it's all in one event. And we have this distinction, which probably matters. But now we have all these races and events and people can only do a handful. So as a race promoter, you either really have to find your niche because you do it hyper local, or you create something that is very distinct, either because it's premium or I don't know, maybe because it's cheap, like with other products as well. But to me, I fear that we currently do in fact have too many events to have them all last sustainably. And in the end, I don't think that race promoters at large get rich or want to get rich even. I think many of these events are done by people who do it out of passion, and they are happy if they can break even. But if you cannot even break even and it's something where you lose money, just the reality is most people cannot afford doing this repeatedly. And I fear we might be at this point. And matter of factly, I'm starting to reach out to people on the organizer front to have more conversations, because I'm interested if that is also their perception. But so far, let's put it like this: most people who organize races that I have talked to so far, they don't tell me that it sells out very quickly. Everybody is like more struggling than it used to be the case in gravel.
Mm-hmm. I'd be interested in the economics of it, because I think it probably varies massively. But I think, say, for example, Unbound, selling a ticket at that price and what you get in return for that ticket, there is no way that there's not a great revenue coming in from that event.
Yeah.
And I think there are other races as well where I think they're definitely making money. And yeah, I think it's definitely a spectrum. There are definitely more like local events where people are doing it purely for passion. And I mean, I personally thought I would never want to organize an event because it sounds unbelievably stressful. If one person has a bad crash, I'd feel awful. So I don't understand anyone who's an event promoter or who makes a race, because I genuinely don't, like, even if it was a great way to make a good chunk of income for the year, I absolutely think the negatives outweigh the pros. Like the stress of just one person having a bad crash and ending up in hospital would not be worth it for me.
I mean, I think it's a proper hard job and an endeavor. And I mean, I strongly assume that you're right and that there are profitable races, which is also fair enough. Like I think everybody deserves their profit if they put the work into it and they build something great. But it's not automatically the case just because you have a gravel race in 2025 that you will be able to turn a profit. I think to the contrary, because there is more and more races and people have not that much time for racing, normie people in particular. And as you said, even for you pros, it's becoming challenging to pick and choose between all the stuff that is on the menu right now. and yeah, so that is of course the core of the sport, because without the events there cannot be gravel racing. By the way, I think one scenario that I don't fear at all is a world in which gravel riding and even gravel racing is going to go away. I don't
I
think
agree
that is
with
going
that.
to happen.
I think that especially because of the whole escaping traffic and escaping cars, and like that becoming so popular, like that being one of the drivers for gravel's growth, I think that people aren't going to stop riding gravel bikes. I don't think there's a way that will kind of revert from it being a popular kind of cycling, especially in the US, when you think about like the issues that they've had running road races over there, and why gravel's become so popular in terms of, I think it's all about like race licensing and insurance, and it being in a way easier from, and I'm obviously not a race organizer, so I don't know this for certain, but from what I've heard, that it would be easier to organize a gravel event there. I can't see why it would become less popular. And same in Europe. Like, I don't think gravel as a form of cycling is going to become less popular. It might not continue increasing in popularity at the rate it currently is. I think that the post-COVID boom maybe isn't sustainable, and we're not going to keep seeing such a, like, I think the projection for gravel bike sales is like really high for the next like 5 years, but I don't know whether realistically that many people haven't bought a gravel bike yet if they were someone that would.
Yeah. And I also think, I don't know how it is in the UK, but here in Germany, I think bike riding at large, drop bar bike riding, has become much more fashionable. I see much more young people on drop bar bikes. I mean, myself, I'm old now, and I like. I don't know if I told this story on the podcast before, but I started to my first drop bar bike I got after watching Lance Armstrong and Jan Ullrich battling it out at the Tour de France, and I was really excited. And I worked in the hotel of my parents for a whole summer holiday, school holiday, to afford my first bike, which back then was less than €1,000. I think it was already in euro. And I did tell none of my friends, because otherwise I was like hip hop minded and into skating and so on. I told nobody that I was now riding a drop bar bike, because it was not cool. And I think this has changed massively, and I see much more, not maybe teenagers, but more young people on bikes. And of course, it has become much more fashionable even to ride, which, like, once something is popular and you see many people doing it, the upper boundary of the market, I don't know if we know where it is, but there is growth potential. And to maybe segue into this, the market environment aspect of a potential gravel bubble. So I also looked up some numbers. Maybe I saw the same projections that you just referenced. In Germany, we have this business association, the ZIV. It's like the business association of the Zweirad, what would you call it, the two-wheel industry, essentially the bike industry, including e-bike stuff. And they are the only numbers that I'm aware of that actually report sales numbers, only from the German manufacturers, but there I think all the major brands are included. And 2023 to 2024, year over year, there was a 33% growth in the category of gravel and road bikes. It's, by the way, specifically put in this order, gravel and road, not road and gravel, because I don't know this for sure, but I've heard rumblings that gravel outsold road bikes in the last years. So if that is between 23 and 24 the case, that the segment of drop bar bikes and gravel bikes is still growing, that is a good sign for the market, because as it currently stands, everything is very reliant in gravel racing on the bike brands as the main sponsors in in the space.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you hear, like, from the people you talk to in the industry, something to the contrary, like sales going backwards for some brands. Did you hear anything to that extent?
I wouldn't say I've heard anything to that extent, but I would say if I think about people in my network and getting contracts for next year, I think I know of more riders who've struggled to get professional contracts or like deals with brands. And I'm not just referring to bike brands, but just like brands within gravel cycling. I think it has been harder for, on the whole, generically, to get sponsorship for 2026. And that could be a reflection of the market, but it could also be a reflection of the amount of riders wanting sponsorship and support. So it's hard to kind of determine what proportion of that is due to any change in the cycling, well, the gravel cycling industry, or any change in, like, there are quite a lot of road cyclists. Well, there have been a lot of road teams that have dissolved in the last year, and there have also, so there are riders that have come from the road gravel, but also I think people have seen the opportunities in gravel racing and potentially think, I sometimes think people think there's more money in gravel racing than there is. But that, yeah, people are seeing financial opportunity there, so are moving over or like accessing sponsorship, and that's then maybe made it a little bit saturated and meant some people have ended up without sponsorship who've maybe had sponsorship for a few years.
My strong suspicion is that it's the latter of the two reasons, just the supply of riders and good bike riders who want to be professionally or semi-professionally in gravel has grown so much that it becomes just more challenging to get those contracts. Because when did you go like pro in gravel?
So I started racing gravel in 2022. So the first year of the Gravel World Series. Oh no, the year before, 2021. So the year before the Gravel World Series, but I wasn't paid until 2022.
So take us back to this time.
Or maybe 2023 actually.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm now forgetting how many years I've been racing.
Well, a few at least. So because take us back to like the first contract negotiations that you were doing, because even though there was a good number of people in gravel at this time, it still felt as an observer that like brands were still looking to get their gravel pros, and some brands were earlier in the space than others. And then there was this time, which is maybe around this 21 to 23 time range, where it felt like the brands were really looking to find their gravel boys and girls for their team, and that was the priority. And so if you, as a relatively good rider, went in there, you did get a contract, and maybe not a high paying one like the top earners in the sport, because I think that is also fair mentioning. If you had great results, gravel was very, very good in the last 2 or 3 years for the men and women alike. But that is really like the top people with the top results. If you won Unbound, you scored like 6-figure contracts as a consequence of this, for instance. But that is not, we are not necessarily talking only about the top end, but more like the average pro athlete. That is where it's getting, where I'm also hearing that it's getting much tougher to find contracts, even if you are still a very good rider, but you just didn't win Unbound. And that is the segment of pros we are talking about here. So
I don't think people were just thinking about the first year of I did the UCI World Series. I don't think there was really anyone earning money or much money at all out of gravel. I think there were maybe a couple of riders, but it was more influencers. So like that first year when there were, and I'm just talking about Europe here. In the US, people were definitely earning money.
Yeah.
So like just in Europe, think about that first year I did the World Series, I don't think there were many people I was racing who were earning money out of gravel, and I was earning money out of gravel that year. Then the next year I negotiated like a small amount of money, but not enough to like live on, enough to just about cover racing. So like kind of semi-professional. And I'd say then you did see a few people, there were people who were in a similar position to me, or like on teams where the team was paying for their expenses, but people weren't being paid. And then I think it was, so that's then 2023. So I would say it's only really been 2024 and 2025 when people have been like salaried or like, and as you said, obviously like people who've been winning Unbound have been earning salaries of gravel racing, but I don't think that it's been six figures until the past couple of years. And yeah, it's kind of really, I think the opportunities financially have really increased in the past 2 years, 1 year. And then now off the back of that, we're seeing more riders coming in and it being actually more competitive.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense to really look differently at the timeline between European pro gravel racing and the US, just because it operates on two different timelines. And sorry if anybody is listening from Asia or South America or Africa, then probably the timeline is even still different.
Even further behind. Yeah, I think we only got gravel races really in South America popping up the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And now next year there's going to be a fair few UCI races. There's a series in South America next year, actually. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes. Because that sounds, I looked at that and I was like, that would be so cool. But from based in Europe, you can't go into a South America series.
Yeah.
I love South America, but it financially would make absolutely no sense.
Yeah. Unless you can live there for like a year.
Yeah, you'd have to commit to living. To be fair, I wouldn't complain. I'd be totally up to live. I'd prefer to live in South America than North America for a year, definitely.
Yeah, me too, I guess. But then to make this viable and work with the sponsors, plus private life, that is not.
Yeah, not so
straightforward. So yet let's talk a bit more about like the stories that you're hearing, and of course you don't have to name names, but who do you hear is having an easy time for the upcoming 2026 season to still close sponsorship deals, and where is, like, in terms of performance and level of the athlete, the cutoff point, and how does the cutoff look like? Is it then like, yeah, a team will still pay, if we're talking about teams and not the full privateer model, will still pay for the travel expenses, but you will not get any, they will give you just material travel expenses, no money? Or is the cutoff point even there is no support at all?
I don't think I know anyone who's got no support at all going into next year, or is having to like is being like forced into like retirement from gravel in a way. But I think it's more the earning money above equipment. But I would say, interestingly, like athletes who are more multifaceted in terms of they do kind of a content creation element are ones who are like finding it less difficult, which I think makes complete sense to me, because like at the end of the day, where is your salary coming from? The marketing department of a brand. So like, are you a good value for the marketing department? Well, actually, yes, if you get good race results, but what's a good race result if nobody sees it? And actually, if you can tell a great story and like you can build a community of people who kind of trust your recommendations, your equipment, like trust your opinions, then actually that's maybe more valuable, if not, or definitely as valuable as like proving that the equipment performs well in certain races. So I think actually, not that we're going back to where like only influencers were making money out of gravel, because I don't think it's at that point. I think there's definitely like all athletes are having to make content, whether they like it or not. Like it's in contracts. Like if you are a purely performance focused athlete, you have to do X amount of reels, X amount of posts in your contracts. So everyone is going down that route. But I think at the end where people are like maybe not like winning Unbound, they then are having to have some sort of content creation, social media presence to kind of complement their racing to show that value to sponsors.
And if you fall in this category, will you still get like some, let's call it salary, even though technically it's none, but like money above like travel expenses and equipment? If you're good at this?
If you're good at this, then yes, I'd say you probably would be earning beyond expenses. But it also depends on the model, because say if you were signing with a team, and I don't know how every team does this, but some teams would say have like a salary where they give you like an expense budget and then money on top of that. But if you're a privateer, you're obviously completely in control of your own budget. So for example, with me, I sign sponsorship deals with various partners, and then I put together like my calendar, and that's like I just take an expense budget out of my budget essentially for the year, and then I allocate and I decide how. And I always I go on the side of doing more racing than less racing. I would prefer to spend more of my income on racing and take less home as a salary, because I think the exposure I gain and how much it's kind of boosted my career from racing a lot in terms of my ability and technique and tactical skills and stuff like that, improving from racing lots. Also personal enjoyment. I love racing, but also the exposure. If I'm going to more races, I get more exposure, I can make more content. And I think that's then, it's kind of an investment, isn't it? In like future sponsorship deals. So I've always given myself less money and put more into my racing, but other privateers don't necessarily function in that way and say like, oh, I am taking home X amount and then anything above is my race budget. But yeah, it's an interesting, you have to just kind of, it's so personal about how you want to do it.
And like, obviously you fall in the category of people who have a very strong social game and content game. And as you say, like racing is also a content creation opportunity for you, which turns it, like you say, into an investment, because once your content reaches more people, it makes you more attractive for sponsors, and it can even turn into its own revenue stream.
Mm-hmm. Although I would say, I think people think that there's more revenue gained from YouTube than there is. So I have a YouTube channel and an Instagram page, which are probably they're definitely my two main forms of social media. And like, even if like my Unbound video got, I think 75,000, maybe 80,000 views this year, and that video produced a revenue of about £600. Like I'm not earning even my flights back for that video. That's just over the entry fee. And I have to pay the entry fee for Unbound. So like going to a race like that, I'm not breaking even on the video I'm making. The video, and that's my most watched video this year. So my highest revenue video this year. YouTube isn't something it obviously is a revenue stream, but it's so minimal in terms of the other revenue streams that I wouldn't consider it in that sense. It's more just the exposure that you get off the back of it, and like the opportunity to a sponsor to say, I'll put your logo in the video.
And maybe like you can sell sponsorship or advertising to brands that you normally wouldn't be able to work with as a consequence of this. I think that is what happens more than like the ad revenue share that you get from YouTube, which like for cycling content creators is marginal. Because it's just still a very niche sport.
Yeah, I also think that the great thing about YouTube is the ability to form a community. And I find with longer form content, people feel like they get to know you better, which is why I prefer YouTube over Instagram. And it also means that for my sponsors, I can like talk about the products I'm using and actually do that authentically, like in a video. And it's not something that I'm doing actively in a form of advertisement, but like if I'm riding X, like my Louth bike at X race, and I'm using the suspension fork and it's making a huge difference to the race, then that's such an easy thing to comment on. And like, it's such natural, authentic advertisement for my bike sponsor. So I think, yeah, YouTube is so valuable in that sense. It's also just at the same time, it's not easy. It's a lot of work. Most athletes don't want to do it. And it's also a completely different skill set. And I'm not a great video editor, but I've had to teach myself how to edit videos. And yeah, I don't necessarily, I enjoy doing it, but I didn't think I would necessarily enjoy doing it when I started doing it. But yeah, I've kind of discovered this like side passion for like editing, but not everyone wants to do that. And a lot of people just want to pedal, and that's completely fair at the same time. But I think it's the industry is entering a really interesting place where you're kind of, as an athlete, expected to make content.
Yeah.
As well.
And like, if we look at other sports, there, I in the last thing that I did, I had a startup. We built software for sports clubs, and we worked in particular with football clubs. And they almost had the problem that their top players had more reach and were more interesting assets for sponsors than the clubs themselves. And we see the same in cycling. And I think what is really unique about gravel, because like we now have teams coming into this space, and maybe we can talk about this in a minute as well. But so on the road, it's all based around teams, and they have the history of like 100 years of the sport, maybe teams later, but say 50, 60 years. So made in the mass media age, all these teams have their PR people, and the riders there are media trained, I assume, in many programs, and very few are content creators. But gravel that came up in this digital world already, and in particular, it came up grassroots, bottom up, which meant by necessity everybody who went into the sport did it as a privateer. There was no such thing as a gravel team pathway or option where a team would pay your salary. And even now, like most teams don't pay salaries in gravel. And so all what you said is now the case. But it also means that for fans, sports fans, it's much cooler because the athletes are so accessible and so relatable, unlike on the road, but much more in tune with how sports entertainment at large works these days. And now in all sports, in football, I had these discussions with team executives where it was like, at what point would you consider signing a worse player just because he has like this huge following, and you know this following will follow the player to your team, which then increases your sponsorship value. And they started to introducing like new deal concepts. They called it, one term I heard used for it, like a 360-degree deal. So they signed a player, but the player also had to give a certain amount of, for instance, Instagram posts and so on to the club, that then the club could sell to their sponsors without having to renegotiate with the athlete, which maybe a top guy like a Ronaldo would not sign this type of deal. But then like mediocre type of players would have to sign these deals. Long story short, I think the gravel athlete per se and the realities that you described are great, and it's a great basis to build a sports entertainment product that is really in tune with what fans out there want and what cycling fans also want, because the few riders who do a good job at this on the road, they are also highly popular.
Yeah, I also think there's something special about gravel on top, where because we start races, or we do the same races, we don't necessarily start with the normies anymore, because we used to just all mass start together. But because we're doing the same events, which doesn't happen on the road, like Paris-Roubaix, you're not, yes, there's maybe a sportive that you can do beforehand, but there's not every road race can a normie do the same route the same day or the day before or the day after. So I think there's something that makes gravel riders way more accessible in that sense. And then maybe I don't want to say the lack of professionalism, but because it's behind in the professionalization of it, athletes are more accessible in that sense. Like you feel more like athletes are closer to a normie than like a road racer on a road team. I feel like there's more of a kind of protective bubble around a road racer on a road team, and like others, like the team staff around them and things like that. Whereas like at a gravel race, like I'm in the sign-on queue with everyone else, and like people will come up to me and say hi, and like that's so normal for gravel racers to experience that. Whereas like and because of that, I'm so used to just having completely normal conversations with everyone who comes up and chats, and you build these like relationships with people who follow you on social media. Whereas I don't think necessarily like Matthew van der Poel is like chit-chatting after races or before races with maybe sometimes, but not
only Tom Pidcock is at Gravelburn. Which, by the way, much to his delight, as he stated in the videos, that he really enjoyed having dinner with other bike riders and talking to normal people, which is not his reality. So there, like I think many many riders, especially those who converted at some point from the road, enjoy this aspect about gravel. And even those ones who are really performance-driven roadies, I think if you talk to a Mats Schmidt right now, he would also tell you that he kind of enjoys the gravel spirit. And I wonder, so more teams will come into gravel, but I think the smart teams already understand that they need to not operate like a road team, especially on the media front, but that they need to operate more, leverage their athletes, the personal brands of their athletes, and create something that has its own unique vibe as a team. An example that I like mentioning is Rose Racing Circle. They are mostly known in Germany. I don't know if you are aware of them or know them very well, but they have a cool style and content or approach to content. And even on the roadside, arguably the hottest, most discussed about team right now are like the Unibet Rose Rockets, which take more of the content-driven approach as a team and give a platform to all their riders, and they expect all their riders to still be personalities. So maybe gravel is not, maybe it's not like gravel is not yet professional enough, but rather gravel is ahead of its time, is at a very good spot, and even road teams rather should become a bit more like gravel is. Just from a fan relation and fan experience standpoint.
Yeah, I think road teams would benefit from, and I think some teams are doing it. Like you can see it with, say, like EF doing their like around the race videos that they do. Like they have a YouTube channel where they do like room tours with the riders and things like that, and like day in the life with a rider, and like it's making the riders more human and more accessible than ever before. And I think the fans do really love that.
Yeah. I think like Jorgensen and Kampenarts with their Instagram stuff were massively valuable for Visma Lease Bike as a team. Because it gave like pretty unique insights from the tour. So yeah, there is a lot happening there. And I think back to the question of, is there a gravel bubble on the horizon? So the demands for riders are very different. A certain type of rider, as you mentioned, still gets contracts, especially if they are also good on the content game, and then of course the highest level of performance. Do you think that we could reach an oversupply of pro or wannabe pro gravel racers as well?
I think we could, especially if there are too many road riders for positions on road teams. I think that's another element to it, that as road, like if the road scene is struggling, then there will be more of an influx of riders from the road. And yeah, just as gravel is becoming increasingly popular, I do think we might reach a point where there's a higher supply of riders than there is demand for those riders for like teams or sponsorships.
I mean, I just chatted with somebody because it is going on the road. I don't know how many of our listeners are also following road racing, but with the how do you call it? The fusion of Intermarché, Wanty, and Lotto, there are riders that will not get the contracts. And I heard from someone I was talking to specifically that a gravel team or some players in gravel were still waiting for to find out who exactly didn't get a contract so they could take these under contract as new riders for next season. So that is in fact happening. And another angle that I would like to address here, you said the YouTube videos you do, they take time, and they also take time away that probably you could spend training and working more, which is not always the right answer, but it creates a different kind of stress and so on and so forth. Not necessarily detrimental to performance, but at least if you would talk to people from road teams, they would say only do your training and then rest all day long, ideally, and do nothing else. So, but you have to do it because it is part of your job description. Now, teams fulfill or can fulfill another function, which is a bit division of labor. Like, they take care of doing all the talks with the sponsorships, and as an athlete, you simply take your paycheck, fulfill your obligations in terms of training, racing, and then the occasional thing for the sponsors. But you don't have to do the negotiations. They also have the content creation infrastructure, so you probably wouldn't have to edit your videos. And I think that is at least the smarter teams understand this and provide more of this type of infrastructure. I mean, just like I saw the teaser today for a video from Paranormal about Mats and Tracker and so on. Rafa with EF, they did it for a long time, including with Lachlan. So the model that I find very interesting is something that you are now friends, I guess you can say, with Drew Dillman and what he did with Chase Walk with Lunchbox Racing. We have in the European scene Lukas Baum and Georg Egger with their speed company racing team. So really privateers joining forces and building their own teams. Is that a model that you see more of, discuss with people? Is that something that comes up?
I think there is going to be more of that, and I've heard of some of that, I think, going to be happening next year. I think for gravel, you've got the element that actually the dynamics of the racing, you don't really get much of a team benefit. And I think that's where it comes in. Like Drew and Chase are teammates in the sense that they'll travel to races together and they're friends, but I don't think ever in a race Drew or Chase are particularly helping each other. They're like friends and like, they're not going to do something crappy to the other one in a race, like chop the other one up or like attack the other one necessarily, but they're also not supporting, like one of them's not domestiquing the other one, unless, for example, at the Rift Mountain Bike race where they did race as a pair. But I think this kind of, you have a teammate in terms of you're sharing logistics, you're sharing content, you're sharing like all these elements. It actually does make sense because it's that shared workload. But I think the hard thing with something like that is you do have to have an amazing dynamic with someone. Like Lucas has that with his teammate, and Drew and Chase clearly have that where like they just work really well as like business partners in a way, and like they pull resources together and sort the deals together and enjoy traveling together and racing together. And I think it definitely is going to be something maybe that we see more, but it's quite a unique thing to find, I'd say.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just thought about it almost from this division of labor angle where, yeah, if like 2-3 riders team up together and build a program where they find sponsors together and so on, then of course the work that everybody has to do on finding sponsors, negotiating the deals, and fulfilling whatever is in those deals also becomes less per individual.
What's quite hard though is as a privateer, it's quite hard to ask for a certain amount of money for one person. So asking for double, and like double the equipment, double the resources, I can imagine, or like 3 times if there's 3 of you, I can imagine as you multiply more people, you're not necessarily multiplying the exposure by that amount as well. So it's quite a hard pitch, I would say. But it obviously depends on like who the combination is. But
you would still maybe need a very good storytelling product.
Yes, exactly. And like you would still, I actually think what we could see more of, and it's definitely something that I would think about doing if I was to get enough money to be able to do this, but like to pair up with like a videographer rather than like, because like you get someone like Pete Stessner who has his mechanic, Big Wayne, so like he travels with a mechanic. I could see the value in traveling with a mechanic, but I would say actually for me, I have a mechanic at home. I like get my bikes checked before I fly every time. Like if there was a problem in flight, I would just pay a mechanic at a local place. I don't think that's a hard thing to just quickly see someone for. Even at Gravelburn's 7-day stage race, I didn't have one mechanical problem. I just needed brake pads changing after the really wet stage. And like that, there were mechanics there. So it wasn't hard to problem solve for that. Whereas content, like Lachlan and Alison were there from EF and they had a videographer and a photographer.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a videographer, photographer, and a mechanic. But I would say like the content that they then get out of that, having a videographer and a photographer at an event, is such high value in terms of what you can then give to sponsors. So I would say more what a potential future model could look like would be like a privateer with their videographer. And that's something that like if I was earning enough to invest in one extra team member in a way, I would actually put that money in a videographer / photographer rather than.
Isn't it already happening? Like especially like the top US pros, it seems like in the all US, of them have their video person on file. And like a good anecdote that I picked up from Sarah Sturm recently. So she travels a lot with Roscoe, I think is the guy. And she explained that she doesn't pay him, but she helps the guy to get jobs from her sponsors at the races where she is. So the sponsors will pay him essentially to travel with her. And that is very helpful to everybody involved then.
No, totally. And also, if you brought someone with you, you could say to them, this isn't an exclusive arrangement. Like you're able to shoot for other people as well. And like there are some privateers who maybe could afford to pay someone to take some photos one day or like during the race. And if they're there shooting anyways, why don't they shoot more people? So yeah, there's definitely potential in that.
How much do you expect that the gravel market is overheated currently and that we will see some kind of market consolidation, be that on the front of the number of races, the number of aspiring gravel pros? Do you think that 26 and 27 will feel like a step backwards, maybe a healthy step backwards?
I think maybe a little. I think what we'll see in 2026 is, say, for example, with the whole Lifetime versus Gravel Earth Series versus UCI versus other races, I think it will be interesting to see who goes to what races and which races end up suffering from that, from the pro perspective. But also I'll be interested to see where the normies go. Like, if there are 45 UCI gravel races, are the normies going to go to all 45? Like, potentially, yes. Like, to date, I don't think there have been any UCI races that have really struggled with entries. So it will be really interesting to see, what happens in terms of that. And I do expect races to not sell out. I don't think we're going to continue seeing all of these races selling out, because I just don't think there are enough people. And as you said, like, how many races does a gravel normie do a year? Like 5 at a push. I would say there are some people who choose one bucket list race a year.
Yeah.
And how do you even choose that race? Like, there are so many races. There are so many really unique races. It must be really hard to like choose and really prioritize. Maybe people do 1 or 2 a year. Like you have to take annual leave.
I fall in the less than 5 category for sure, but I'm also in like the subcategory within gravel normies that is called gravel dads. And then on top, gravel dad of small kids. So that is like probably
That's even
the least.
harder.
Yeah, that is like the least number of races among all. So I extrapolated and said maybe the average 5, but yeah, maybe the average is less than 5, and then it becomes hard to sustain all these races and events unless they go. I mean, what we have in Europe, I don't know if it's the same in the UK, but I think in many countries in Europe, the races are organized by local clubs and associations, which are not necessarily for-profit organizations. So that can then help to sustain this. But then, as Vervecken in the as we speak, still unreleased but soon to be released podcast said, like he is looking for a higher degree of professionalization among organizers who organize races for the series than what he currently has. And so that probably rules out this model. But then again, that is the top end of the sport. I mean, on a grassroots level, which of course is the foundation of the sport and the activity of gravel cycling, that is where these associations are very helpful in Europe. Is it the same in the UK? How does club racing there work?
Oh, UK is hard because the licensing to do, like if we don't want gravel, I think it's really hard to organize racing here because of the land, like being able to race on land. Like there are only certain locations where you can actually host a gravel race, and then it's really expensive. So I know, like, for example, the British Gravel Champs, they really struggled to find a venue because and in the end they had to do one where we did so many laps of like a loop because it had to be within like a forestry area where they could pay for that forestry area. In their previous location, they were being charged so much to do it that it was unsustainable to be able to do it there. So the UK's really hard in that sense just because of land usage. But we do still have some events. I don't think we've seen the same boom in the UK in events that you have like across Europe or globally. And I'd say it's because of that. And like not being easy to do events here. But one thing that is interesting that happened recently, just on the note of like the professionalization of the sport. So British cycling has never been involved in gravel, and the people who organise the British Gravel Champs, who are nothing to do with British cycling, just announced that they aren't organising the Gravel Champs next year because they didn't come to an agreement with British Cycling, who want to organise the national championships.
Oh, okay.
So interestingly, next year, the national championships will be run by the National Federation, who've to date had no interest, to a point where for world championships, they asked the elite riders to buy their own kit to do the race.
Oh, it's the same in Germany.
Yeah, which I think is insane.
So let's see if that's a good or a bad thing for the British Championships then.
It will be really interesting to see what they do, because it will also, I like, as I said, in terms of like location, there aren't many locations where you can do a proper gravel race in the UK. So like, I mean, the British Championships, apart from this year, it has been like 70 kilometers the previous years.
Okay.
Which I would say is more like a long cyclocross race.
Yeah. And this year you had a TTT as well.
Yeah, we had
not a TTT, a TT. What was it?
TT.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was like a TT. I don't think that will happen next year. I don't think.
Okay.
It was a fun event, and it was a great idea for them to just make more of the weekend, but I don't think it seemed so popular, and I don't think British cycling will do that.
Maybe a dirt crit would rather be it. National Dirt Crit Championships.
It'd be entertaining. I'd definitely go and watch.
For sure. Let's probably conclude this on a more optimistic note. So now, I don't know how far you are with your 2026 season planning, but looking forward to next year, what makes you optimistic for gravel? And what are you stoked about for next year?
Oh, good question. I think I'm stoked personally for some of the events that have popped up on the calendar that I think look really cool, and to do those. So for example, like just looking at some of the new UCI races and like places that I can go and race my bike that I've not been before. So I'm stoked to kind of get part of that. I'm intrigued to see what happens next year. I'm like, it's an exciting time for the sport, and it's cool that it's growing so fast. And like, for me, I feel like I'm getting to a point where like I am now sustainably, like I'm sustaining myself as a professional gravel rider. And like, that's pretty cool. And for me, it's now all about like doing the building blocks to be able to keep doing this for the years to come. But yeah, it will be exciting to see who races what races this year, like next year, and which races kind of come out on top as the most important ones.
For me, the best thing about this year, and it's going to continue next year, is that we got to see more of the racing live. And even if it was not live, then like, for instance, the gravel burn coverage was high quality, even though it was not live. And being able to see more of the racing just makes it much more intriguing, because suddenly there is, like, as somebody who creates a lot of content about the sport, there is more you can see, so more you can talk about and discuss. But it also makes it like, visually, to me, it's such a great sport and much better than road cycling. Like, watching road cycling, of course, it's cool because of the peloton and so on, but just the environments that riders are in, to me, is much more aspirational. I'm certainly biased and not representative, but it's cool. And that we get more of this bodes well for the future of the sport for me, even though we might be in a stage where it is a bit overheated, and on some areas there will be kind of consolidation.
I also hope that we see more prize money, because we started to see that this year. So say, for example, with gravel burn, there was like a big prize purse there.
Yeah.
And we see that next year with Lifetime. And like, when you put prize money in races, it brings the athletes there. So like, you can see with Lifetime, like Rosa, Caro, Morgan, like those girls going over from Europe, like, makes complete sense, because at the end of the day, the winner gets what, 50K?
Yeah.
It's a pretty decent payout on the scheme of things. So like, I think that's one thing I'm optimistic about next year, is I hope that more races, if they are making money, can put some of that money into prize money, because actually, like, I don't think that gravel's necessarily got a sustainable model at the moment in terms of how professionals are making a living. And I think it could be closer to the triathlete model, where like, you get a lot more from race organizers to do their events or for prize money after doing events. And I think that actually could be, especially when we get more live coverage. And as you say, that then gives more exposure to the races, more exposure to sponsors and stuff like that, that actually, I think athletes could be paid a bit more at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that would definitely be good for everyone. I think triathlon, even though I would hope that gravel remains its very distinct, quirky identity going forward, is at least like how it works, like on a structural level, a very apt comparison, just because it is also mass participation, and they found out some good things. And I'm not tri-coded enough to know this, but I don't think there are teams in triathlon. I mean, it wouldn't make sense. And I think
there are a couple, but it's kind of similar to, so like there's the BMC team, and like, so, but it's similar to gravel team, in the sense that they kind of like, they sort out various partners and they're not racing together, but it would be the same as gravel. So it's like privateers and then small teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think in gravel, for a certain part of the calendar, like even racing together as a team can make sense. Like, say, at Unbound, definitely more than at Trucker, say, but the wider the roads and so on. So yeah, US style racing to an extent, and maybe some of the European flatter races as well. Maybe, I don't know, they have too many curves, but these would be the races where you can sometimes see teams, and that is the second factor where economic sustainability could come from. The thing that I would hope for there, and now would be about the right time, would be that some of the series organizers would set frameworks for this sustainability. Say teams should have a maximum number of riders, for instance, right now, that can enter races, and then on top, revenue share needs to become something, not of the events business. I don't think that the organizers should of the races on the ground should distribute entry fees, but then for everything that is earned in the growing media pie of the equation, that needs to be distributed among teams and riders, and there need to be models for this, which we don't have on the road, which is a big problem for road racing as well, because it's so reliant on sponsors, but they at least are able to attract like endemic brand partners more easily, but also only because of the Tour de France, realistically. So yeah. And I think that is the cool thing about gravel, especially because it's not completely under the UCI umbrella, is that we have more actors and innovation is happening there more quickly, and something that looks very different from what cycling has on the road could emerge. And I think these are like decisive years we are in now, and I would hope that some organizers have like a bit of a forward thinking approach to this, but also like the managerial acumen to implement it, which is not easy.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. Do you have any like final thoughts on this before we wrap it up here?
I just hope it isn't a fad. No, I don't think it is a fad. I actually, out of interest, I was like, I'm going to ask ChatGPT what ChatGPT thinks. Does ChatGPT think it's a bubble or not? And it said no. So if ChatGPT is anything to go by, it says that gravel cycling is going to continue to grow, and that people will continue to buy gravel bikes, and it has, for lots of reasons, lots of potential in the future, and we don't need to worry.
I mean, for once, let's hope ChatGPT is right, and then the future is rosy.
I hope so. For the future of my career, I hope so.
Cool. Hey, thanks a lot for taking the time today, for jumping on. It was great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.